all doing SBR in September?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. I think the pass rate will be good. I really do. Yeah, I really do. You know, it's a change, and the ACCA will be keen for that change to be successful. So, yeah. Good. So, there's two things that I want to do with you very briefly. First of all, I want to take you through a slideshow fairly quickly. I don't think there should be too much on this slideshow that is new. Yeah, but I just want to kind of make sure that you are comfortable with the changes that are taking place, and just it gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about SBR in general. So the first bit is a bit of a chatty presentation about SBR. Whilst I'm talking, if I say anything that you disagree with, that you don't understand, that you would like me to repeat, please talk to me. Yeah? I will be on an aeroplane tomorrow going to Vietnam, and then on an aeroplane going to China, and you know, this is an opportunity, and you can ask me anything you want to, and I will do my best at answering the question. So please, when I allow a pause or there's an opportunity, please just feel free to speak up. All right? Having run through the brief presentation on the slideshow, I'll then use the opportunity of talking to you about this particular question that we've got, which is a question called Rashford. All right, some of you may know Rashford. From England, maybe Man United. So, very quick generic justification. The ACCA are changing the syllabus, have changed the syllabus from P2 to SBR, from P1 and P3 to SBL. They don't make this change lightly. Yeah. When I was a student 30 years ago, I did ACCA 30 years ago, and when I did ACCA 30 years ago, there was no computer-based exams. In fact, none of the exams were on computing. And I had to do a 6-hour double-entry bookkeeping paper. Right? Now, because we have computerization, you know, bookkeeping is not necessarily a key skill that accountants need these days. Yeah, because of the computerization. So the ACCA, thankfully, has evolved, and when I was a student, there were no international financial reporting standards. So the ACCA was an early adopter of IFRS, and the ACCA is changing because the world is changing, and if ACCA doesn't change, it will die. And the changes that it made has been as a result of very comprehensive consultations with academics, consultations with students, consultation with employers and members, and with employers, and with employers. Yeah? It's about what accountants do in the real world. And the result of their research has influenced the exam, the change in the exam. More holistic reporting. Not just about financial reporting anymore. We've got to think about integrated reporting. We've got to think about you know, governance issues around social responsibility. All of that comes in. That's not brand new. We do integrated reporting anyway. Yeah. Stakeholder management framework. Can't emphasize too much the importance of the framework. Yeah. So there's a series of changes. There's a series of reasons why we're changing, and these changes will also include ethics. Ethics is becoming more important. If we want to have good quality financial reporting, one of the things that you need to have is a good set of accounting standards. There is an awful lot of effort put into writing those accounting standards, and you put a lot of effort into learning them, don't you? And they are a principles-based set of accounting standards. So one of the things that we need for good financial reporting is to have good regulation. But that's not enough. because you need good people. If the accountant is crooked, if the accountant is corrupt, if the accountant is unethical, incompetent, then however good the rules and regulations are, the financial accounts that are being produced are not going to be any good. So you not only need to have good regulation, but you need to have ethical, competent, integrity, good accountants in order to produce good financial reporting. You could argue they're as important as each other. For this paper, though, there is a greater emphasis being placed on ethics. Financial instruments are not going to go away. Do you like financial instruments? What about related parties? Do you like related parties? Let me give you a tip. Yeah, related parties will be there in the exam. I mean, it's almost inevitable. It may only be 2 or 3 marks. Yeah, but you know, it is now on the lips of the examiner. Every time I see him, it's about related parties. Focus on related parties. So just kind of, yeah, that is something, yeah, that must be all over. Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be there for 10 marks, 20 marks. It's not that kind of paper, is it? There's lots of little bits, and one of those little bits, I'm sure, will be on related parties. I'm not going to talk about the past. I'm going to try and talk about SBR, and you know that in SBR there are no optional questions. The whole paper is compulsory. Why is that? Is it to make life easier for the examiner? Is that the reason? I think there are 2 reasons, perhaps, why there is no choice in terms of the exam. One reason is an academic reason. It's because it's going to make you have to study the whole syllabus. Yeah. Under the old paper, a lot of students avoided any sort of discussion of current issues, avoided question 4, and the ACTA felt, well, actually, what we want to have is professionals who can do anything. So they want you to study the full syllabus, and having a compulsory paper does that. Second reason is when you go to work and you're asked to do the accounting for the pensions, you can't say, oh, I'll choose not to do that. I'll do something else instead. It doesn't work that way in the real world. So for that reason, there's a compulsory paper. Section A is going to have the group accounts questions, and you know about the group accounts questions, don't you? Yeah, you're writing about groups. You'd like to write about groups. Explain. Yeah. So you can apply your knowledge, because the writing about groups is as important, if not more important, than actually doing the numbers themselves. So you're not going to be asked to do a full set of accounts. Presumably you have been shown and you have practiced how to do a full set of accounts, as to sort of give you a broad overview. But what you're now doing on this revision phase at the end is just keep on practicing, calculating the goodwill, calculating the exchange difference, calculating the cash flow, but at the same time explaining the goodwill, explaining the control to control, explaining how we've calculated everything. So explanations are important. Second question is on ethics in section A. Second question is on ethics. And then there are 2 other questions which could be on anything, yeah, throughout the syllabus, but likely to be on accounting standards, how they're applied, yeah, different stakeholders, what the impact is, so on and so forth. Very much a written paper, I'm afraid. Very much a written paper these days. The old knowledge is still the same. We've got to emphasize principles. You've got to be aware of the format of the change. It's a change in focus for SBR. Framework is important. Ethics is important. I'm not really telling you anything that you don't know. Ethics will be examined. Ethics will be examined in question 2. In the first specimen paper, it was there for 20 marks. In the second specimen paper, it was there for 15 marks. So ethics will be there. Ethics, have some of you done P1, P3, SBL? Oh yeah, okay. So in those other papers, there's an opportunity to delve into some ethical theory, teleological, all that stuff. No? Yeah. Don't worry about that for today. Don't worry about that for SBR. The only ethical issues that we deal with in SBR are practical accounting issues. So ethics is always examined in a very practical accounting scenario. And there'll be 2 professional marks, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So it's all about practical accounting. This is me giving you 30 seconds of revision of ethics. You've come across these 5 pillars before, haven't you?
Yes.
Thank God for that. Yeah. You will get no marks. You will get no marks in the exam if you write, there are 5 ethical pillars that accountants have to adhere to. An accountant must act with integrity, i.e. be honest. We're not regurgitating the facts. We're not being asked to say what ethics are. We're being asked, you're in the water, and to get out of the water, you're in a problem, yeah? What advice are you giving? And we're using these ideas of acting honestly, of being independently minded, of being competent, yeah, of respecting our client's confidentiality and behaving in a professional way, and that's how our answers come out. Ethical questions partly revolve around the identification of the ethical issues involved. Is it about competence? Is it about integrity? But what is slightly new at SBR is that we should then be thinking about the action that is being taken. So it's about identifying the ethical issue, and then it's talking about the action that you take. Now, I don't want to come across as being flippant here, but if you're advising somebody who is in an ethical dilemma, to me, the advice is always going to be very generic. There's only a limited number of things that you can do as an accountant if you find yourself in the middle of an ethical dilemma. And these are, speak up, these are confrontation, these are discuss. If you think your boss is doing something wrong, the first thing you should do is have a polite, respectful conversation with your boss and say, I would like to challenge you, I would like to suggest that the accounting treatment you are proposing is wrong. So, as professionals, we have a voice. As professionals, we can disagree with each other, we can debate with each other. We don't immediately start throwing mud and saying you're a crook. We say, in my opinion, maybe we should consider it. So the first thing to do is to raise the matter directly with the individual, discuss it with the individual. The second thing to do is, if that doesn't work, is find a friend, phone a friend, yeah? Find Is there within the organisation an independent, non-executive director? Is there a legal team? Is there somebody, is there a whistleblowing officer within the company? Or maybe talk to the auditor. This is one mark. Flag it up. This is another, so this is one mark, discuss it. This is another mark, raise it with somebody independent. Get a sounding board. At the same time, you can seek advice. You can seek legal advice. If the question implies that you are a professional accountant, then you can seek advice from your professional body. And this action here is easy to write in the exam, maybe difficult in practice, yeah, if you've got, bills to pay, but, in reality, you do not want to be a party to fraud, yeah, so considering resignation, all right, related parties are going to be a very common thing. So these four things, these four actions, I think are very generic. If you're ever asked in an ethical scenario what action should be taken, confront the person, think about whistleblowing, think about getting, an independent person involved, get legal advice, and get out of there if it's all going wrong. Resign if it's all going wrong. And that I think, again, for me that's a bit of a tip. Yeah, I can see that coming up time and time again in the exam. You identify the ethical issues. You talk about the action that can be taken by the individual. But the third aspect is to understand that ethical behaviour has consequences. That unethical behaviour, I should say, unethical behaviour has consequences, all right? Because if you put yourselves in the shoes of stakeholders, what tends to happen when an accounting scandal breaks is the share price of that company collapses. If the share price of that company collapses, as it did with Tesco's, then the investors lose out. Maybe they lose out the capital value because the share price falls, but they also perhaps have a suspension of dividend, so they're not getting their income. So the investors fall. Remember, staff can be investors, so they could be sitting in two camps, but staff maybe lose their bonuses, or maybe they lose their jobs. Because if the company now is making losses, suddenly having a collapse in the share price, maybe they start making redundancies. So there is an impact on staff. There's an impact on the reputation of the company. Maybe the members of the board get sacked. Yeah? Maybe the auditors get rotated. Maybe the auditors lose out. So be prepared to be nimble. Be prepared to read the question. And if you're asked about the impact on the stakeholders, recognize that the stakeholders is plural. The obvious stakeholder that loses out is the shareholder, the investor. But move the debate on. Think about the board. Think about staff losing their jobs. Think about criminal prosecutions. Think about redundancy. Yeah? Think about the knock-on effect with the suppliers. If that company goes under, if that company fails, there's a knock-on in society. So, to me, ethics now is no longer a 2-3 mark affair. It's a big compulsory question. I know, as a marker, I know that what has happened in the past is that candidates doing P2, probably about 30% of candidates doing P2 used to write nothing on ethics, and they would lose 3 marks. And many of those students who wrote nothing on ethics managed to scrape through the exam. They were just being marked out of 97. But if you write nothing on ethics under SBR, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good. Yeah? Because you're going to be marked out of 90, you're going to be marked out of 85. It's it's now a much more serious issue. So yeah, I know we love numbers, I know we love accounting standards, and I'm just thinking, how can we add a little bit of value here for a quick session? I'm just picking on audit. I'm picking on ethics because I know it comes up, because I know traditionally people don't like it, and we can add a little bit of value. Yeah, you can do a little bit better. Right, I think that's really all I want to cover in terms of the slideshow. Before we have a look at Rashford as a question, are there any questions or observations you would like to make? I quite like this room actually, because I can see everybody. Yes, Sam.
I would like to ask regarding on the action on the ethical.
Yep.
Since you gave out like there are like probably 5 of them, and during the exam, could we like list all of them, or they're like limit for some actions only for the marks given on the actions?
Okay. Let me just repeat the question so that I understand the question and everybody is able to hear the question. What action should be taken? Should we write down all 4 or 5, or is there a limit? Challenging question. You have to look at the question and the number of marks available, but if you're asked about the actions, probably there are maybe 2 or 3 marks available for this little part, because in a question you've got to talk about the accounting issues, you've got to identify the ethical issues, you've got to identify then the action that you would take and the impact on the stakeholders. So it's about creating for you a structure of a way to approach these types of questions, because you've got to deal with the accounting problems, then you've got to identify the ethical issues, then you've got to talk about the action that you would take, and then you've got to talk about the impact on the stakeholders. That to me seems to be the logical way. And although I've written them out there as 4 separate parts, maybe seeking advice and this one could almost be merged. Yeah, but I am quite a fan of, and I have a catchphrase, a number of catchphrases, but one of my catchphrases is full stop, leave a space, new paragraph. So when you've made a point, leave it, yeah, and have some white space before making the next point. Challenge your marker to give you 1 mark for that mini paragraph. Challenge your marker to give you 1 mark for that mini paragraph. Yeah? Because that's how markers operate. They're giving 1 mark per relevant point. 1 mark per relevant point. Do not write an essay. Yeah, do not write an essay. Do not write long paragraphs. Do not use fancy, complex words. Do not write ever so smallly either. Yeah? Yeah, write just nice and large and bold. Leave some space. Just keep moving. It doesn't matter. Yeah, if you want to use little headings, use little headings. So yeah, 3 marks or so. Yeah, try and bring all 4, and then there's a related part. You bring that in as well. Yeah, try and bring them all in. Fairly generic. Okay, I think I need a little bit of technical help. Whilst this is turned off and this disappears, and then I can start scribbling. There we are. And this disappears. Not now. Okay, In the exam, the reason you're doing the exam is because you want to pass the exam. And in order to pass the exam, you've got to get the marks. Now, when it's a pass examination question, you get the opportunity of looking at the marking guide. One of the skills that I would recommend that you practice is trying to double guess and anticipate how the marking guide looks. Because in the exam, if you can anticipate how the marking guide is going to look, that is going to severely influence how you structure your answer, the length of your answer, and the detail of your answer. Because if something is only worth 3 marks, you should only really say 3 things. If something is, you think, worth 5 marks, then really you should try and say 5 things. And it's a bit of a waste of time saying 5 things if it's only worth 3 marks, and it's a bit of a waste of, you get the point. I was detained earlier. Have you read this question? Yeah? So I want to use this question, which I guess you haven't seen before, but is written in terms of SBR. When you pick up a question, what's the first thing that you read? The requirement. Excellent. Yeah, excellent, of course. So what is the requirement? Discuss the ethical and accounting implications of the above situations from the perspective of the reporting accountant. Consider the courses of action open to the reporting accountant and the potential impact on stakeholders if the finance director's suggested accounting treatments are adopted in the final financial statements. 20 marks. 2 professional marks will be awarded for the application of Let's think, how are those 2 marks awarded? How are you going to earn those marks? Now, I've got to be careful what I say here. I'm going to be a little bit flippant. This is not the same as SBL at all. I'm very specifically talking about professional marks in SBR. Let me tell you that the markers have an element of discretion about giving these marks. The markers are basically instructed to give those marks when it's a good answer. So if the answer is legible, if it's well presented, if it's addressing all of the points, then these marks are available and up for grabs. If the answer is illegible, incomplete, doesn't address the issue, then those marks are not going to be given. In other words, if it's a really good answer, then you're going to get 2 extra marks on top. If it's a poor answer, you're not going to get any professional marks. And if it's kind of okay, you're going to get 1 out of 2. So maybe the default is 1 out of 2. In other words, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Yeah, that's how it works. You know, that's how it works. So, yeah, we know about those 2 marks. We are being asked to discuss the accounting, and we're being asked to discuss the ethics. What accounting issues are there in the question? What accounting issues? What accounting issues have we spotted? Well, there's no real prize, because isn't there a heading which says investment property? So one of the accounting issues is investment property. One of the accounting issues is investment property. The reporting accountant discovered that Rashford owns several investment properties that are rented out to tenants. one of the investment properties in a block, luxury apartments. One of the tenants is a company. That company is controlled by a director's husband. The rent payable on this luxury apartment is in arrears and has been written off. Rashford is a big company. The amount of the write-off is immaterial, doesn't really matter, and therefore the finance director is saying, let's not bother making a disclosure because it's immaterial. The fair value of these assets recently has fallen and the losses have been taken to equity. Is there any other, we'll talk about the ethics in a minute, we'll talk about the accounting treatment in a minute, but is there any other accounting issue that is being raised there? Related parties, yeah, related parties. So the question doesn't explicitly say related parties, but you know, what we've got there is a member of the key management team. A director is automatically a related party, and their spouse comes into that, and just because it's a company, they control that company, that will be a related party. So although it doesn't say related parties, it is in there. Then we've got a heading called intangibles. During the year, it became apparent that a development project was no longer technically feasible or commercially viable. Some unexpected defects were discovered. The finance director has written off the capitalised development expenditure as a prior period adjustment. The company has argued that it should have known the development project was never going to be successful. So there's something about a prior period adjustment in the context of an intangible asset. So that's a bit of interplay between ISA 38 and ISA 8. In the draft accounts, all of the non-current assets have estimated useful lives revised upwards by 10%. No justification has been given. So I think we've got a separate accounting issue there which relates to PPE, ISA 16. I never really bother encouraging students to learn or to write out the name of the accounting standard, the number of the accounting standard. I mean, if you know it, you know it, but you're not getting extra marks for saying it's ISA 16. You can simply say the accounting standard on PPE. You know, what matters is you understand the contents, not that you've got a rote learned memory, that you know the number of the standard. I mean, you know, Google will give you that information in the real world. It's not what you're being tested on. So it's about the contents of the standard. Finally, share-based payments. So there was a reference there to share-based payments, and the finance director is due to retire, has a substantial number of share options that were issued at the start of the year. They're due to vest shortly after the current year's results are announced. No charge has been made in the financial statements in respect of the options granted to the director on the basis the options were hard to value and it didn't cost the company any money. The finance director has assured the reporting director that she will support his appointment as her successor if he follows her suggested treatments. And then we get back to the requirements, where we are discussing the ethical and accounting issues. We are considering the courses of action open to the reporting accountant. So we're going to identify the issues. So we're going to identify the ethical issues, identify the ethical issues. We're also being asked to talk about the action that would be taken. And this question goes one step further, and it says the potential impact on stakeholders. Right, let's listen, because what we've got there is 20 marks overall, We know there's 2 marks available if we do a good answer. And we've got accounting and we've got ethics. How many marks do you think are available? How many accounting issues have we identified? 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. How many marks available for the accounting do you think? 10. Yeah. I would agree. And therefore, if there's 10 marks for the accounting, yeah, you're good at maths. Yeah, you know, no calculators needed. And there's no reason why we can't say there'll be 2 marks for the investment property, 2 marks for the related parties, 2 marks for the intangible, 2 marks for PPE, 2 marks for share-based payments. We've now got 8 marks to split across here, and I suppose I'm a little bit nervous. I would have preferred this to be 9. Because if it was 9, I'd say 3, 3, 3. Yeah? I mean, I don't quite know where it's falling, but, you know, roughly, yeah? Because I've got 8. I mean, I need it, you know, it's not a precise science, you understand. And I'm genuinely believing that this approach, if you practice it, is going to massively help you structure your answer. Because we've now got an insight into the marking guide. So this means that when we write out our answer, we're writing 2 marks on investment properties, 2 marks on related parties, 2 marks on intangibles and PPE, 2 marks on prior period adjustment, 2 marks on, you get the idea. Yeah? So, I'll give you a typed answer in a minute, but I would just like to very briefly talk through the sort of things that we might be writing. Investment property. Let's remind ourselves. Rashford owns 7 investment properties, they're rented out. One of the investment properties is a block of luxury apartments where the tenant is in arrears, they've written it off, no disclosure, the fair value of their assets has fallen, and losses have been recognised directly in it. Okay. How do we get the first mark about investment property? How are we going to get the first mark? What are we going to say? Definition. Yeah, I like that. Got to make sure the definition is applied to the scenario. So something along the following lines. Rashford is correct in identifying the luxury apartments as investment property because they are held for investment purposes and rented out. Full stop. Something like that. We've said the definition of an investment property is it held for its investment potential, and I've used the word Rashford. I've made it specific to the question. And to that extent, Rashford is correct in classifying it as an investment property. So 1 mark for that. How do I get the second mark? Has Rashford accounted for the investment property correctly? Yes or no? Of course not. You're never, ever, ever going to write a long answer which basically says the accounting treatment is perfectly correct. I agree with everything in the question. There are no ethical accounting issues. Yeah? You know, there's always going to be something to challenge. What is wrong with the accounting treatment? What is wrong with the accounting treatment? They've taken the gain or loss to equity. That's what you do with PPE. It's not what you do with investment property. I say faulty gains and losses should go to P&L, should go to income statement. So they are technically incorrect. So your first sentence is, Rashford does have an investment property to help for investment purposes. Your second point is, Rashford is doing it wrong. The loss should be recognised in profit. If they're using the fair value model, the losses is recognised in profit, not equity. Short, sharp, simple sentence. Full stop, leave a space, move on. 2 marks. Related parties. Yeah? First mark. Yeah? It is a related party. The company is a related party. The director is a member of the key management, therefore a company controlled by his spouse is a related party as Rashford. Simple. Don't give a long definition of a related party. Go straight for the jugular, go straight for the conclusion. It is a related party because it's the spouse of a member of the key management team controlling that company. Second mark. What's the second mark going to be? Disclosure, yeah. They're claiming it's immaterial. Bull. We've got to look at materiality from the perspective not of the company, but of the related party of the director. Anything to do with directors is significant and exciting to the investors and the stakeholders. So materiality is important. So again, what they're doing is wrong. What they're doing is wrong. The disclosure must be made in the account. So again, 1 mark, it is a related party. Another mark, yeah, is that it must be disclosed. Yeah, so we're relating it to the question. Secondly, intangible assets. They are spending money on developing a project. They have now unexpectedly realized that it's no longer technically feasible and it's no longer commercially viable, and therefore they have written it off. They've written it off as a prior period adjustment. Help. Are they correct to write it off? If you are spending money on developing a project, there's a whole host of criteria that have to be met to recognise it as an asset. There's a whole host of criteria, including that it has to be technically feasible and commercially viable. It's no longer commercially viable. So is it an asset? No, because it's not going to give you a future economic benefit. Do you know what? You don't have to remember ISA 38 in great detail. If you remember the framework, the definition of an asset is something that gives you future economic benefit. This project no longer gives you commercial viability. It's not an asset. So 1 mark here. Rashford is correct. It is no longer an asset. It must be written off. Something like that. Yeah, because it's no longer commercially viable. So what have they done wrong? What have they done wrong? What's Rashford done wrong? Is this the if under ISA 8 it's the correction of a prior year error, then I will be more than happy to restate last year's accounts. I'll be more than happy to make a prior period adjustment. But is this a correction of a prior period error? No. It's a revision of an estimate. Circumstances have changed this year. It was valid what we did last year based on last year's information. And now it's a revision of an estimate. And therefore, we've got to take the hit. Therefore, we've got to take the charge. Therefore, the expense has to be written off against this year's profit. 2 marks here for intangibles. It is correct to write it off. It is no longer an asset because it's no longer commercially viable. Full stop. Leave a space, new paragraph. However, the write-off is a revision of an estimate and should therefore be charged against current year's profits. It is not a prior period adjustment. There's always something wrong. PPE. Do you know what? This is what revision is all about, isn't it? You see, when you're being taught and when you're studying, you naturally study in silos. So you learn about share-based payments in one lecture. Yeah? And then you learn about impairment in another lecture, and you learn about intangibles in another lecture. And what happens in the exam is this. You've got to have your brain and somehow got to be nimble so that you can jump around and access your different files, yeah, in answering the same question. And you've got to have this ability as well to understand it's about related parties, even when the question doesn't use the word related party. Yeah? You know, if you're buying land and building, if you're asked for an accounting treatment of a land and building, think, because it could be PPE, it could be an investment property, it could be held for sale, or it could be inventory. If you ask the simple question, how do I account for a building that I have just bought? Oh my God, that's a big question, because there are 4 different ways it could be accounted for. Could be PPE, could be investment property, could be held for sale, could be inventory. And you've got, you know, in the exam, you've got to have that nimble mind. Yeah? And if you're revaluing it, then you've got to think about the deferred tax on the revaluation. If it's overseas, you've got to think about whether or not you track and all that stuff. Anyway, I'm getting excited. PPE. In the draft accounts, all of the non-current assets have had their estimated useful lives revised upwards by 10%. Hard to be quite like that, because the standard does require that we keep our estimate of our useful lives up to date. Yeah? So it is a requirement of the standard that we keep our accounting, our estimate of our useful lives up to date. So we could say that for 1 mark. What's the slight problem with the question though? No justification. I'll tell you what it looks like to me. I'm beginning to see a pattern. The loss was taken to reserves. The related party was hidden. The loss was taken to reserves and not charged against profit. I think what this person is trying to do is make the profits go higher. And we come along and we're having to say, no, the right thing to do is, actually, I'm sorry to be a bit boring, but there's an expense here that must be charged to reduce profit. And to me, it looks like a very generic, unjustified, all non-current assets, make their lives longer, would have the effect of boosting profit. So, you know, I'm very happy that, in theory, we keep our useful lives under review, but they should only be extended in justifiable circumstances, and there needs to be an explanation for that. Share-based payments. The finance director is due to retire. That's why they want the profits to be higher. That's why they want the profits to be higher. Because they're due to retire, they're due to cash in their options, and they want the share price to be good. The finance director is due to retire, has a number of options that were issued at the start of the year. They're due to vest shortly after the current year's results are announced. No charge has been made. No charge has been made for options granted to the director, because options are hard to value. Well, yes, they are hard to value. Wax shows. And it doesn't cost the company any cash to issue the options, which is true. If a company issues options to a director, should there be a charge in the P&L? Yes. Why? What's the reason? Why have we given options to a director? What is that doing to the director? It's making them work harder, isn't it? It's a reward. Yeah, it's part of their wages. Yeah, and wages are an expense. So we're giving the director a valuable thing because they're working for the company. That's wages. So there must be an expense. I know it's hard to value, but that's why we have the Black-Scholes option pricing model. Yeah? So the standard says you've got to arrive at a valuation. Yes, it's subjective, but you've got to arrive at a valuation at the grant date. But you could get too involved, because this is not a question of writing everything that you know about share-based payments, because how many marks have you got here? 2. You've got to apply it to the question. Yeah? Rashford should be charging an expense for the options granted to the directors because it is part of wages. It is a transaction of value. 1 mark. Secondly, you can say valuation can be done using an actuarial valuation, for example, Black-Scholes. Yeah? So, it's 2 marks. You're saying 2 things. There should be an expense. We're justifying it. It's about Rashford. It's about the scenario. Right. Bish, bash, bosh. Yeah? The accounting bit. I think you quite like that. Ethics. What's the accounting? What's the big ethical issue that strikes you? Or perhaps I should say ethical issues. If we think about the ethical issues, what are the ethical issues that are striking you in this question? So the 5 pillars: confidentiality, don't see it really. Professional competence, yes. So there is an issue around competence because there are errors. If somebody makes a mistake, and with ethics there normally is a mistake being made, the first stone that you throw is errors have been made in the accounting treatment of investment properties, the non-disclosure of related parties, the accounting treatment of intangibles. Errors are a sign of incompetence. Competence is a key ethical pillar. To be ethical, we need to know what we're doing. Is there any other ethical pillar that strikes you in this particular question when all these mistakes are being made? You have to be very, very naive or very, very charitable simply to say, oh, there are mistakes. Because I think there's enough evidence and clues in the question to suggest the mistakes are deliberate. Because they're wanting the share price to be higher. All of these point in the same direction. By correcting them, profits will go down, down, down. The mistakes have made profits go up, up, up. So you've got an issue here, I think, about integrity. And I think there is an element of dishonesty, because there is a pattern. Relate it to the question. The existence of the errors in relation to the non-disclosure of related parties in respect of the accounting treatment of investment property demonstrate a lack of technical competence. This is unethical. Full stop, leave a space, new paragraph. All of the errors point to overstating profit. The suggestion, therefore, is this may be deliberate manipulation. This shows a lack of integrity, and that is a more serious charge. I think there's a third issue, and maybe it's a slightly throwaway comment, but at the bottom of the first page there is a rather nasty little suggestion. If you do what I tell you, if you go along with me, I'll give you promotion. Sounds a bit to me like a bribe. And the flip side of that is if you disagree with me, I'll kick you out. Which is the opposite side of that, which is a bit of a threat. So if somebody is behaving in that way, offering what appears to be a bribe, creating a culture where it's not open and transparent, what ethical pillar is that violating? Professional, well, yes, it lacks integrity, but I think you could also bring in professional behaviour, yeah, because of the conduct, yeah, of the accountant in offering the promotion. It has the feel that that is not a professional thing to do, to offer a carrot. If you do this, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. That's not the way really we should work as professionals. So bear in mind, we're really looking at 1 mark each, and bear in mind that we are always trying to relate it to the question. Don't just write out the 3 pillars, they have to be related to the question. Now, in order to answer the question, we've also got to talk about the action. I feel a sense of déjà vu coming on here. What actions are we going to take? You discuss it with the person first, you challenge them. Yeah? These matters should be raised with the finance director. These matters should be raised with the finance director. If there is no joy, then you seek to find somebody independent to report the matter to, and you consider taking legal advice. So the first thing you do is you discuss it with the finance director. If there is no joy, you look for somebody independent, maybe the auditor, maybe another senior independent director, non-exec. You potentially get legal advice, and ultimately you would consider resigning rather than be a party to a smell. Yeah? Your career, it's not worth it in the long run to turn a blind eye to these things. Yeah? I know it takes courage, and in the exam it's a relatively easy thing to say, but a part of being professional. Yeah? So you would couch it into, you're not going to say, I would resign, you don't have to be definitive. I would consider, I would advise they should consider resigning in the event that these matters are not resolved with satisfaction. Then, as a throwaway, because we still got something else to say about stakeholders, yeah, what is the potential impact on stakeholders? Well, investors, if the scandal comes out, there is going to be a reduction in the share price and maybe a suspension of dividend payments. Yeah, so there is going to possibly be ramifications for employees in terms of bonus. Yeah, in terms of bonus, there may well be an issue with audit rotation. So the auditors, yeah, if they have on their watch not be picking these things up, and these things have a history, and then they come to light, the auditors are blamed, or the auditors have a sense of responsibility, and normally they are rotated off. So there is a sense of, yeah, consequences to stakeholders. And if you look at the old P2 questions, they don't go into this level of detail on ethics. I don't think I've taught you anything new in terms of technical content, but the audit question, the ethic question at question 2 is about marshalling your knowledge, applying your knowledge, and trying to think about a template. Trying to think about the marking guide. How am I going to earn marks? If all you do is write about accounting, you're throwing away a lot of marks. There's 2 schools of thought. There's one school of thought which says, write about the accounting, deal with the ethical issue. Write about the accounting, deal with the ethical issue. Write about the accounting, deal with the ethical issue. Personally, I favour writing about the accounting issues first, and then writing about the ethical issues second, because there's a risk of a bit of repetition, because basically, you know, this is an error, this is incompetent, you know, this is you know, potentially lacking integrity. So you end up repeating yourself a little bit here. So that's why personally I prefer to deal with the accounting first, because that's more of a homegrown area, and then dealing with the ethics second. Identifying the issue, action that you take, stakeholders. Clearly this is not the exam question. Not the exam question. But I think the exam question will look like this. And I think what you need to have is confidence in the approach that you know that you will be adopting to the question, because you practice questions like this. You know, there's plenty of these questions in the BPP kit. There's a couple of specimen papers. Now you've got this question as well. And you'll find that the questions tend to repeat themselves in the sense that there are errors, competence, integrity, it's always related parties. But think about the action. So I've given you a copy of the question, and I've sort of talked you through how you understand the marking guide to be made up, and then how that creates an answer for you. And I'm now distributing, so if you could share the answer. And the answer is written by me in the way that I would try and answer the question. I hope this would get me something like 18, 19 out of 20. Yeah, it may not get me 20 out of 20. And it's certainly written in a slightly different style to the examiner's answer. When the examiner writes an answer, sometimes they're a little bit academic, a little bit fulsome. They're not necessarily 100% what you as a student need to do to pass. What I've tried to do here is to write in that simple way, in that succinct way, in a style which I think is worth mimicking and inspiring. So there's a few spare copies because the way it's distributed, there will be a few people missed out, and a few people here missed out as well. But there's plenty of copies for everybody. If there isn't, I'm sure, because if everybody got a copy of the question, then everybody should be able to get a copy of the answer. And the college has the ability to produce spare copies in the event that we do run out of what is there. Tell me, what's your feeling about SBR? Because for me, there's two limiting factors about passing this exam. Two limiting factors. Yeah? One is time, one is knowledge. Which one applies to you? What is it, time or knowledge? I'm hearing a little bit of both. I'm hearing mostly time. Now, time is it's a really good place to get to think that time is the issue that's stopping you passing the exam. Because what that means is that if you had 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, then you'd pass the exam. You would be able to get half marks. You're not going to get the answer right, but you would, if you feel that you would get half marks if you had 4 or 5 hours, then you're at a place where some of you are there now, some of you are going to get there in the next few weeks. You're at a place where you know you're going to pass if you have enough time. And therefore, the thing to do to help you pass the exam is to get faster. Is to make sure that you know what you know. Yeah? That you revise your revision. Because once you've got to that state of mind, you don't particularly want to go diving off and panicking yourself by looking at stuff that you don't really understand. Once you have enough knowledge, it's about the ability to recall that knowledge. So question practice under time pressure. Question practice under time pressure is really, really important. And peer review. You can swap your answers. You can show your answers to your tutors. You can show your answers to your friends. You can work together and compare and see and evaluate yourselves to improve yourselves, because you've got the marking guide, you've got the approach, yeah? You've got the answer. Don't just copy the answer out. Try and come up with your own answer. So once you're at that state, you're in a good place, yeah? Because time, for me, is the major enemy in this exam. So exam technique becomes very, very important, yeah? So you allocate your time, you move on, you leave space. The worst thing that happens in the exam, look, I'll give you another tip. I'll give you another tip that's going to come up in the exam. A surprise. There will be something in the exam that your tutor hasn't taught you, that's not in the BPP kit, that's never come up in any past exam question whatsoever. There will be something in the exam which is cuckoo, which is weird. There will be. 3 marks, 5 marks, whatever. You're studying full time. You've got excellent tuition. You're here at a Platinum College. You're taking the qualification seriously. And if you don't understand what those 3 or 5 marks are about, no one else will either. Those 3 and 5 marks, that is not the difference between you passing and failing. Ignore it. Move on. Spend your time in the exam doing what you can do, not trying to work out something absolutely that you've never heard of. Spend your time in the exam doing what you can do. Leave space. If you have time at the end, go back and have a little guess, go back and have a little play, whatever. But don't look at a question and say, I know that bit, oh, I don't know that bit, so I'll do that bit I don't know first. No, do the bits you can do first. Spend your time on that. Because the worst feeling in the exam, is, oh, I remember we did this in class. I can't remember what the answer is. I know when that guy came in for a day, he talked about actions that we could take, and I remember there were 4. I can't remember what they are. That's when you get the sinking feeling in your stomach in the exam. So, revise your revision. Make sure you know it. Make sure you can connect it. Find a friend. Yeah? Find a friend who wasn't here today and tell your friend what happened today so that your friend will benefit. But actually, in you telling somebody else what you learned today, you will benefit even more. It's fantastic to have a friend who asks you questions because they don't quite understand deferred tax, or they don't quite understand something. Because when they ask you that, they benefit because you tell them, but you benefit too because you're giving information out, and that's what you have to do in the exam. You guys have soaked up so much knowledge, so much information is in your head, that in the exam, it's all got to go down on the paper. Yeah? You've got to write neatly. You've got to keep going. 3 hours and 15 minutes. Are there any more questions? Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. Thank you for giving up your time. And good luck with your SBR exams.
Any questions? Any questions?
Did everybody get a copy of the question and the answer? Is there anybody who feels they're missing a piece of paper? Yeah. Adam. Okay, there's a beautiful question being asked there, such a pertinent and relevant question. I want to share the question and the answer with everybody. Do we get a mark for application? Do we still have to write the fact? And the answer to that question is within the question. Yes. Yes. So when we talk about investment property, okay, what we should say about an investment property is Rashford has correctly identified the property as an investment property because it is held for its investment potential and let out to tenants. Full stop. Now, in that sentence, we've earned 1 mark because we have given the fact, the definition of an investment property, which is it's held for its investment potential, but we've wrapped it up with the word Rashford. We've applied it to the question. We've justified it. They're renting it out. So, if you simply say an investment property is a property held for its investment potential, you're probably not going to get a mark. Because if all you do is vomit on the page, if all you do is regurgitate, if all you are is Google, that's not discussing, that's not giving advice, that's not answering the question. So to get the first mark about an investment property, use the name of the company, Rashford. Yeah, justify it's an investment property. And then the second mark is they're using the fair value model. The profit should not go, if they're using the fair value model, the profit and losses should go to P&L, income statement, and not directly to equity. So the accounting treatment is wrong. So the second mark is picking up on the accounting treatment. Yeah, and it's the same with all of them. You know, share-based payments. Again, you've only got 2 marks on share-based payments. So you've got to get Rashford in there straight away. Share-based payments must be an expense because Rashford should charge an expense for share-based payments because it's being paid as wages, and wages are an expense. It's a transaction of value, full stop. Then the second point is, despite the fact it's difficult to value, it has to be valued at the grant date using the Black-Scholes, using an option pricing scheme. Because you know so much about share-based payments. I mean, that is one of the frustrating things about the exam, isn't it? There's so much he doesn't ask you. There's so much you know, and you've got to tailor it to answering the question. So, madam, you ask a beautiful question, and within your question was the answer. Yes, you have to give the facts, but the facts must apply to the question. Bring the name in related to the question. Thank you for that question. Sir, at the back.
If the question did not ask about the ethical issues, should we include any ethical issue that we may think that there is any in our answer?
Okay, so let me just make sure that I've understood the question and everybody's heard it. If the question doesn't mention ethical issues, right?
Did not ask. Okay.
Did not ask. Well, I guarantee that question 2 will ask about ethical issues. So the format of the exam, the specimen paper 1 and the specimen paper 2, and all of the information given to me by the examiner, by the ACCA, is that ethics will be there, and it will be there in question 2. So if you see incorrect accounting treatments in question 1 or question 3, don't bother saying there's a competency integrity issue, because you're not being asked about the ethical issue in those other questions. But in question 2, I guarantee you will be asked about the ethics, and therefore you will need to identify the ethical issue. You will need to talk about the action that you would take, and if it is asked for, touch on the stakeholder impact. Is that okay? Good. I just want to take a picture. Last question, madam. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yep. Okay. Please.
For the impact, do we have to focus on the issue if the scandal got out, or because the impact that you gave just now was particularly focused on if the scandal went out? So do we have to speculate that the issue will be,
So in some questions, it will be very transparent what the accounting issue is. So in some questions, it will refer to an investment property. It will refer to an intangible asset. So there will be key buzzwords which are signposting you to that accounting standard. However, let me warn you that, like we saw here with related parties, there will be in the exam some hidden issues. So, like I was saying earlier, if you buy a property, how do you account for a property that you have? Potentially there are 4 ways. So if, for example, the question says the asset is damaged, you've got to think impairment. If, for example, the asset, if for example, we're committed to selling an asset because we no longer need it anymore, you're thinking whether it's held for sale. So there are those times where you have to take your general knowledge and you have to kind of think a little bit, stretch a little bit.
I was focusing on the impact for ethical issues.
This question is just mentioned the impact is that
Yes.
if these issues had it enough to the public, so the investor will the share price will drop and so on. So is that must be like assumption that if this issue has been spoken up to the public, then what is the impact?
Yes. I mean, what the point is, there is a serious impact of unethical behaviour. You don't need me to tell you that in Malaysia, surely. Yeah. Same in UK. You know, when there is an ethical problem, and it comes to light, all sorts of people are affected. You know, there's criminal cases, there's auditors, lots of people are held to account. There are consequences. So it is simply a few marks. But this is just something that is a subtly new thing in terms of SBR, that ethics shouldn't be thought of as a dry academic issue. It's about a practical issue. We've got to have the antennae to identify the ethical issues, to give practical advice, and to understand the important consequences of it. The marking guide will be flexible. All right. So the marking guide will be flexible. In other words, there will be a limit to the amount you write on ethics, and there will be a limit to the amount you write on action. But it could be that you could have potentially a 4th mark there on ethics if you continue to talk about the lack of objectivity. Because they're not acting in an independent way. if you're being articulate there, you could potentially get an extra mark there, but you're never going to get more than 10. You're never going to get more than the overall, you're never get more than 8. You're never going to get more than the overall number of marks. So there's a little bit of wriggle room. But again, I say to you, instead of striving for the extra mark, bear in mind that the first mark on action is really easy to get. Because the first mark on action is discuss it, raise the matter, try and resolve it. You know, so try not to over drill into one area when you realise that it's all about 2 marks here, 2 marks here, 2 marks here, 1 mark there, 1 mark there, 1 mark there. Try and keep it light, try and keep moving. Thank you. I'm fine.
Any questions?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine for me. Yeah.
Last question.
Last question. Yeah, please.
What do you think of cash flow statements?
What do I think of cash flow statements?
Yeah.
Okay. What do I think of cash flow statements? I love cash flow. Yeah, I love cash flow. The history of cash flow at P2 is that it used to come up 1 in 6, 1 in 7. Yeah, and I think the history, you know, when we, oh right, slow down. A year ago, there was a meeting. I was not at that meeting, but that meeting took place, and the examiner was at the meeting, and his 2 assistants were at the meeting, and a senior member of ACCA was at the meeting, and they had decided that the SBR change was going to happen. They had the syllabus, and they know that they're writing 4 exams a year. So they had a meeting, and they had to decide what was going to be examined over the first couple of years. September's exam is already written. So is December, so is March, so is June. For the next year, the exams have already been signed off, finalised and agreed. And for the year after that, they are work in progress, they're almost finished. So there was a planning meeting, and at that planning meeting, the examiner came up with, well, this is what we're going to examine in the first 8 sittings. And surely, one of those exams in the first 8 sittings will be a cash flow. One of them. Yeah? One of them will talk about the P&L, one of them, and most of them will talk about, well, so, you know, you're going to get a calculation on goodwill, you're going to get a calculation of an exchange difference, you're going to get a cash flow, you're going to get a control to control, you're going to get a dispose. I mean, I'm not saying anything new, I'm just going through the syllabus. Cash flows is on the syllabus, there's a 1 in 6 chance, 1 in 8 chance it will be there. And what will be there, when it comes up, it's not if it comes up, it's when it comes up. I mean, you're just doing the exam in September, then you'll forget about it. Me, I'm going again for December, I'm going again for March, you know, I'm in the game. So cash flows will be there at some stage. And when it comes up, you will be asked to calculate a cash flow for maybe 4 marks. How much money are you spending on PPE? And there will be an acquisition, there'll be a foreign exchange difference, there'll be a lease, there'll be a disposal, there'll be an impairment, and then you'll have to work out how much cash you spent on PPE, and there'll be a 3-4 mark calculation, or how much tax you've paid, and there'll be a deferred tax, and there'll be a revaluation, and so on and so forth. And then you'll have for 3 or 4 marks to explain why is the cash paid different from the depreciation charge? How have you arrived at the cash paid? Explain the meaning of this number. What does this tell us? Yeah, and then there'll be another cash flow because it's got to be 8 marks, and there's got to be another one, so maybe a little reconciliation, part of the reconciliation, and then an explanation. Well, why doesn't profit equal cash? Why have you added back depreciation? Explain that. So you are not going to be asked to prepare a big cash flow, but you will be asked to prepare an extract. This number, that number, yeah? And what does it mean? What does it mean when you charge depreciation of 500 and you've spent capital expenditure of 50? Well, it means you're not replacing your assets. Because if you're consuming at 500 but you're only spending 50, the business is contracting. You know, so a little bit of interpretation, a little bit of understanding. That's what I think of cash flow. I love cash flow. Do you love cash flow? I'll tell you what, every sitting that cash flow doesn't come up at SBR, it will become more likely. Every sitting that cash flow doesn't come up, it will become more likely. And then when it does come up, it won't come up the next time. That's the way it normally works. Same with foreign currency. You know, same with foreign currency. Tend not to get foreign currency being repeated, but it's not there every time. Make sure you know cash flow. Well, make sure you know everything. Make sure you know everything. Okay, so conceptual framework is really, really important. What I've given you here is I've tried to give you a structure to approach question 2, an ethical question. So, because if we have a structure, then we can feel safe in the exam. We know what to do. We know where to go. Yeah? Talking about the accounting issues, then talking about the ethical issues. We've got a structure there. Obviously, with a question on framework, it doesn't follow the same structure. You've got to have a look at the question. There isn't such an obvious template for conceptual framework. Additional performance measures, you also briefly mentioned. Additional performance measures. There's a really good article that's been written by a member of the examining team, that you'll find on the internet. All you have to do is go on Google and search additional performance measures, ACCA, and you'll go straight to that article. And that article will basically, I'm sure, tell you what you need to know in terms of what is coming up in the exam. Because in one of those 8 exams, there will be something on additional performance measures. Pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. I hope